Folks, thanks very much for joining us today. And again, I apologize for our slight late start here. We will be recording these sessions today, so they'll be up on the OpenDaylight YouTube channel within a week or so after today. To start off this mini summit, I suppose maybe first I should introduce myself. I'm Phil Robb. I'm the Director of Networking Solutions for the Linux Foundation, and what that really means is that I spend all of my day job time working to facilitate the OpenDaylight project. That includes helping herd some of the activities within the technical community, as well as helping to facilitate different aspects of the nonprofit. OpenDaylight project is also a 501c6 industry consortia that helps to sustain that open source community as well. And with me I have four very distinguished members of the technical community, and starting with Anees Shaikh, I'll have him begin with introductions.
Okay. Hi everyone, thanks for being here this morning. My name is Anees Shaikh. I work as a network architect at Google. So in my current role, we basically look at our WAN, our data center networks, software that runs them, in particular SDN. As you know, Google has been deploying SDN in lots of parts of the network, so it's been a lot of fun to get to know that. I've only been there 6 months, still learning. Before that, I was at IBM, where we helped kick off the OpenDaylight project, so I've seen it grow up and very proud.
Hey, good morning everyone as well. I'm Kyle Mestery, and I'm the OpenStack Neutron PTO, and I also work at Cisco. I've been involved with OpenDaylight and how it integrates with OpenStack for a while as well, and also with the OBSDP team inside OpenDaylight as well.
I'll try ours. Welcome everyone. I'm Mathieu LeMay. I'm CEO of Innocent Technologies. We're a smaller company that's actually making a distribution out of OpenDaylight. So we actually have been working on the project for a while. We were involved a long time in watch mode and then decided to join in a little more. So we've been involved in SDN from a research and academic point of view for about 10 years. So, and then we're coming out of the closet.
Hello, I'm Ed Warnicke. I'm on the technical steering committee for OpenDaylight, and I'm a committer on controller, OpenFlow plugin, service function chaining, and I'm probably forgetting something.
Integration.
Oh, integration. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm still the third most prolific contributor of code to OpenDaylight. I believe so. And I think I've probably contributed to more projects than anyone else. Though I work very broadly across OpenDaylight, just trying to keep the wheels turning.
How can you do that? You have 26 hours of a day?
I don't sleep.
He doesn't sleep.
No, seriously. Ask Andy. Anyone on the project can confirm I don't sleep.
Particularly if you're looking at something less than 45 days from a release coming up, Ed's sleep cycle gets smaller and smaller the closer we get to release.
Yeah, we need to fix that because
We need
it's
to
not
fix that.
happening for anyone.
Yes. So the format that I'll do for this panel is I've got a few questions that I can cede to the panelists, and we'll see how long they talk on those. I'll rein them in if they go too long, because some of them can be quite open-ended. And I also definitely want to have some time to let the audience have an opportunity to also ask questions as well. So we'll probably kind of stop in the middle, see how the questions go from the audience, and I'll pick back up with mine if the audience is quiet. First question for the panelists is rather a broad one. We find very often that as you're doing development in technologies in open source where it's a nascent and a new type of activity, industry-wide debates end up happening very specifically in the construction of the code for a given project. Given that SDN is so new and there are so many things that are yet untested with this particular type of technology at scale, I'd like the panelists to talk about what they think are some of the biggest industry events, or industry debates rather, and how those are playing out inside of OpenDaylight.
I guess I'll take that one. Everyone's looking at. Actually, yes, there's different point of views. It actually comes down to the different either the different protocols, the different approaches, a lower level or higher level approach to actually defining the main issues. Are you working at the policy level, or are you actually working more on a protocol or forwarding plane level? There's also the debates between more imperative or model-driven approaches within OpenDaylight. But I personally think that all this debate is healthy, and that's why OpenDaylight is not as much of a product as a platform. So it's for different use cases to come up with the tools or the things they need to actually put that together and use that appropriately for the use case they're trying to solve. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also, I agree. I think all of these debates are really healthy and things like that. And if we're talking on that angle, I think as well, one thing that people always talk about in open source is code wins, but I think that's true to some extent, but code and consensus wins. You have to build consensus. You have to get other people on board. It's not just code wins. Code wins if you have your own project, your own open source project, and your own, but really it's consensus as well.
Yeah, I have the tiniest bit of caveat to that, because I think I overall agree.
Okay.
But one of the things that we've striven for in OpenDaylight is basically, if you have to block everything on consensus, you get nowhere, right? And so you try and structure yourself in a way where you can let 1,000 flowers bloom, and where it's like, okay, great, we have three parties, all of whom think the other is wrong about how something should be done. Rather than fighting about who's right, go try it. Let's see what you produce, right? And they go start their own projects, and they see what they can produce, and they come back and they solve things. But the other thing that actually I think also does happen, and that you have to be careful about, is you've got to try and find a way to build consensus that allows everybody to win, right? So I see this, one of the things that we've seen in OpenDaylight, we have most of our projects in the Helium cycle actually involve participants from multiple organizations at their inception, which is awesome. It shows the diversity of the community that we're building. But what consistently happens in those communities is you get a clash of visions, and then you have a resolution that has to occur. And that resolution usually ends up as, okay, we have to find a way that makes sense, such that everyone's vision is expressible without stomping on the other guy's vision. And often this is a little bit more work than just trying to ram your vision down everybody else's throat. There's a certain amount of getting along that happens. Tempers sometimes flare, people have to be sometimes calmed down, but at the end of the day, it produces a massively better result than anyone's particular vision. And so I think that's sort of the key thing. I think it's not so much consensus in open source, but leaving space for the multiple visions that are present and finding a way that we can all get along so that the consensus can emerge from the code, from stuff that actually works, instead of debating what should. Because I don't know where you are as an architect, but I'm almost always wrong. You know, until we get to code and discover the things I'm wrong in, we're just blowing hot air.
Right. No, I agree. But my point was mainly that there's this belief or this sense in open source that code wins. And definitely that's not always the case. You can't just show up with code and say I've won, right?
Yeah, this comes down to what I refer to as the throw code over the wall fallacy.
Yes, exactly.
Which is the number one anti-pattern for open source participation. I'm going to take this giant pile of code that I have in my company, I'm going to throw it over the wall. That doesn't actually...
Maybe it's open.
Right, it's under a license that's open.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between an open source project, in my opinion, and a lump of code that somebody threw an open source license on. Yeah. And that's the difference between something that is a one company wonder project that happens to be under an open source license and something that has a lot of different participants involved and has a true community.
No, I agree, and that's the thing, right? I mean, community is warts and all. It's not just the good stuff; it's the bad stuff, right? And so you have to take it all in. You have to take it all in. You can't just get the good stuff. So otherwise, you end up with.
Particularly at this stage of a release where none of us is sleeping.
Okay, I promise now it won't just be Ed and I for the rest of it.
I just wanted to add one comment. I mean, since I kind of look at OpenDaylight a bit more from a user-operator perspective now than before, where I was working in a vendor organization, while OpenDaylight is great in that it enables these debates to happen in code in real implementations, right? By having multiple projects that may do, for example, virtualization a little bit differently, or have a different notion of what the API should be. I think we do have to take some care that from a user perspective, when you sort of pick up the platform and you see a dozen different ways to do a particular function, it does become a little bit challenging, right, to figure out exactly what is the right thing to use, what's the most performant for my environment, what's going to scale, etc. So I think as a community, the project is still young. In my opinion, I think we're still at the point where we need to really try lots of different things and have these debates. But slowly over time, I'm hoping that, you know, certain ways of doing things will emerge as not necessarily the right way or the only way, but at least the recommended way for different kinds of environments, just to help our users consume the platform.
Very good, thanks. Thanks, Anees. And yes, to be a bit more specific on that question, I'm gonna drill down a little bit farther. So SDN can mean different things to different people. You know, one of the key tenets originally of SDN was centralized control plane. Let's put everything in the middle so that there's one device, one entity that can see across the network. It allows for, you know, the individual components, the network elements within the network to be less intelligent, and gives applications, the users of this network, a much broader view and a better view. Others would argue that the most important thing that should be happening is strong programmability. The ability for applications to both be triggered and modify network configurations based on policy, based on some level of significantly better programmability than exists today. I'd like to hear the opinion of the panelists between those two or others as far as what are the key tenets of SDN that are driving your organization or your customers in those cases, your use cases, for what you're trying to develop out of an SDN platform.
Stephen, do you? I don't know about that. So I haven't. My view is that those two things, the sort of application programmability and the centralization of control, kind of go hand in hand, right? It's, you know, the APIs and the abstractions. I mean, the third thing I would add is that abstractions are another key part of what SDN is. So without being able to abstract the network in a way that makes sense for a given application, it's really not that useful. If you're just providing APIs to do really low-level programming of the network, we haven't progressed that far beyond, you know, the state-of-the-art today with CLIs and so on. So having a central controller with the right set of northbound APIs is what enables SDN applications to be written to take advantage of the global visibility across the network and so on. So I don't see these two things in sort of contradiction. And like I said, I think abstractions is really important. We don't really think that much about, you know, what is the model of the network that we're trying to expose to the application programmer or the user. But for me, that's a really key part of what SDN needs to be.
And I get to specify my question a little bit more. I guess part of the debate is, you know, centralized versus decentralized. You know, can you truly fully centralize control, or is there a level of decentralization and management that's still necessary? That was part of the question, right? Still maintaining programmability, but actually doing it in a semi-distributed fashion.
Yeah, Phil, I might add to that. I fully agree with that approach. As long as it's logically centralized, it's what matters. You'll have distributed process, I'm pretty sure. So you don't have to have it running at a single place, and you don't want that. But like just to answer a bit of your question as well, what are the key factors that's driving our involvement in SDN is really about open access networks, right? About the ability of sharing infrastructure. We believe that networks should be public goods, like data ducts or something that actually belongs to the city. We have a different approach than Google here, but we've been working with municipalities too, but in a really open way so that people can actually create substrates that they can have for smart grids or for anything that any purpose they want out of their infrastructure. So basically slicing at the hardware level and slicing at and SDN is a tool to do that. So for us, it's all about that. And and by SDN it means a lot of things. It's not only the protocol. It comes from the white box approach down to the actual control channels. And policy.
Okay, very good. Given that this is, you know, a cloud open conference, I wanted to talk a bit about the relationship between OpenDaylight and cloud infrastructures such as OpenStack. That one in particular, there's been a reasonable amount of work. Neutron, pre the existence of OpenDaylight, had continued to develop different extensions because there were networking features that were necessary inside of OpenStack that just weren't available from any other open source platform. So with the continued development and evolution of OpenDaylight, I'd like to hear the panelists' opinions on the relationship between OpenDaylight and cloud platforms like OpenStack, and what should be the proper evolution again over the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, I can take this one. I mean,
I thought that might be a tailored question to you, Kyle.
I'm interested to hear what the other panelists' opinions are as well. I mean, if you look at everyone else does. No, but if you look at how the two are different, right? I mean, and how they can work together. What's going on in Neutron now with the ML2 plugin and the agents for OBS and the experience and these types of things. I mean, effectively we're building a reference controller platform. I mean, that's really what the base implementation is in Neutron. And so I think the question that a lot of people ask is, should we be doing that? Should we be investing the time to build a reference controller inside of Neutron, or should we be looking at one of these other open source controllers like OpenDaylight or things like that? And I would argue that OpenDaylight is maturing to the point where maybe that becomes an option soon. We could use it as a reference controller. It's had one release, so its second release is coming up. I can tell you about that, I'm sure. But I mean, that's a real question to ask. I mean, down the road, do we want to take those resources and redirect them into something like OpenDaylight, perhaps, as a community, as a broader community to move SDN forward there and to move the integration with OpenStack as an example.
Yeah, and sort of seeing things from the other side.
Yeah.
I would say that the cloud orchestrators like OpenStack are incredibly important target customers for OpenDaylight. They're not the only target customers. One of the things that's very interesting about OpenDaylight, and this sort of gets back to you have to not just push your one singular vision, you have to realize there are many visions that have to be served, is SDN-like networking is fiendishly complex. There are tons of different use cases in tons of different spaces. About the only thing I can guarantee is that we don't actually have any single person in this room who knows even half of them. And so you have to provide a true platform that people can use to solve those problems. You can't just try and solve a single problem. So while it's imperative that we meet your needs, if we were to just drop everything about being a viable SDN platform to only meet your needs, I don't know that would be good either.
Oh no, and that's not really.
Oh, and I know you're not asking for that.
Oh yeah.
No, I get that. No, I totally get that.
So I would even go a little further and just make the assertion that OpenStack Neutron should not try to be its own SDN controller. So I know that there's a sort of this point of view that, look, if I've got OpenStack, I really don't want to go stand up a separate controller just to do the networking piece if I've got everything sort of built in. I mean, I would argue that OpenStack is hard enough to get going so that, adding, something like a controller, it shouldn't be that big an incremental effort. The real reason, though, is that, I think OpenStack is a great place, and Neutron in particular is a great place for us to really think about what are the right set of APIs and abstractions that the rest of the cloud infrastructure needs from networking. But to embed the implementation also there means that, there's really only one kind of reference implementation. I think having a multitude of SDN controllers that can then implement those interfaces and APIs lets users and customers figure out what's the right implementation for them. If they're beholden to a particular vendor for their SDN solution, they can use that vendor's plugin in Neutron. If they want to use an open solution, they could use OpenDaylight or the other open source controllers. So I think that it's really important for Neutron to actually hopefully start going in the other direction of thinning out its interface and outsourcing, if you will, more of the function and implementation to the multitude of SDN solutions that are available as backend.
I just want to add to what Anees just said. I fully agree with his statement. That's also my view on how, for having actually played in a little bit of both worlds. When you're starting to touch things like NFV, you're starting to touch more complex scenarios, extensions kind of get ugly very fast. So the less you actually do, the easier it is to just bypass some of these calls down. And so having everything as a pass-through or at the API or spec level, I think is important from an OpenStack environment. But what will be the reference implementation is still to be discussed.
Yeah, and definitely. And going back to what you were saying as well, so if you look at the history of Neutron, when the original Open vSwitch plugin and subsequently the Linux Bridge plugin were created, they were literally created as a reference implementation. And that was the intent, but nobody saw it that way, right? And so people tried to install it, and the Open vSwitch plugin scaled to 10, 15 hosts maybe. And so we as a project have had a lot of technical debt that we've taken on because of that decision, and we have spent many cycles improving that. And really there wasn't another choice that was out there that we could do at the time. So we, so from that perspective, we've had to improve that, and we've gotten it a lot better. If you look at the tests that Canonical did with the Icehouse release, for example, with Neutron, I mean, they were able to get to 65,000 VMs before they hit problems with security groups, which will be fixed in Juno, which then let them get to the Nova limit, which was like 160,000 VMs on single cluster. So we're working on that sort of stuff. But ultimately, at the end of the day, now we're left with supporting those things as mini controllers to some extent. And you're right. I mean, there's some people that maybe want to just stand it up without a controller. So ultimately, we're probably going to be left with both. And that's the way it is.
You're describing to a certain extent something that we see repeatedly in OpenDaylight, which is we have people all the time who come in and say, I'd like to do this really cool thing that requires the following 6 servers. And there's no hard and fast like people being told, no, you can't do that. That's just not the way we roll in OpenDaylight. But the people do sort of usually say, that sounds awesome. Could you please make sure that it works out of the box? And most people, like after they get over their initial excitement about their 6 servers that they want to integrate with, immediately see the value in having something where you just unzip it and run. So far we haven't had any actual problems with that, but it's a recurring theme, if I could just get my 6 servers. And it's like, yeah, that's awesome, but let's not force everyone to.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, I'd like to open it up to the audience now for questions.
So would y'all be advocating for, and sorry I said y'all, so would y'all be advocating for at the Neutron level to have basic APIs that can be extracted by any controller? So like if, for instance, I wanted to build a controller that interacted with traditional network devices through expect, that would be how it's done. And if that's the case, my second question is, why is that any different than hypervisors or storage? Is that equally as complex? Why is networking special?
I've only so yes, to answer your first question, that is what I would advocate, right, is that it really focuses on the API, because getting the API right is not also easy. I mean, I think that we have projects in OpenStack Neutron now that are actually revisiting the API and sort of looking at it from more of a group policy kind of point of view, as opposed to the subnet, network, traditional, maybe more traditional point of view. So I think we're still experimenting with APIs, so that's why it's crucial that we focus on that and leave implementations to provide the actual execution of those APIs. Now your second question, I'm commenting on Neutron because it's what I'm familiar with, but I think you're right that we should think about similar things for compute and storage as well, and we are to some extent, right? I mean, I think that projects like Cinder and Nova also have the ability to use multiple underlying technologies to enable different hypervisors or different block storage implementations, whatever it is, right? So I think that OpenStack in general, I hope, will evolve to be more of orchestration machinery as opposed to all the back-end implementation as well as the APIs and the orchestration. But I think we're a ways from that. And I think, as Kyle said, and I appreciate this point of view also, that there are some users who will want everything out of the box, turnkey, right? They don't want to stand up 3 different sets of servers to be able to run their cloud. I appreciate that point of view also, but I just think architecturally it makes less sense for OpenStack.
So one of the things that sort of, you said, why is networking so much more complex? And networking suffers a little bit from crisis of success on the perception of complexity, because we've given everybody a consistent interface for 3 decades from their point of view from hosts, And what that conceals from you is, yes, networking is about 3 orders of magnitude more complex than storage and compute. Well, maybe only 2. It is really, really complex. So.
Next question, in the back there?
I work primarily much lower than this in the embedded area, the data plane, specifically in our problem called buffer bloat. I'm curious, to what extent are these stacks able to compile their rules and stuff like that into FPGA sorts of things, stuff that needs to happen fast?
This is right for alley.
That's actually a very, very interesting one. Earlier on I mentioned that my vision included white boxes and hardware level work. That's definitely my vision of where SDN needs to take the next steps. There's a lot of flow level challenges for having proper virtual network elements, having proper instances that have their dedicated pipelines, that have their dedicated processing associated with them. And that can then turn out to be any type of forwarding abstraction on top of that, or you can do some more of an NFV scenario running on that to do special traffic processing or whatever. But that it is very important that in the future we hope that OpenDaylight is going to go in that direction and help you set up these lower level instances and push some of the stuff to, for example, FPGAs or any other mechanisms underneath. So it is part of my long-term vision, but we'll see how the whole industry goes.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite interesting, and that gets back to one of the central tenets that we have is actually our northbounds are generic-ish. You know, they are northbound models for a capability, usually not a protocol. And so right now, everyone's very excited about things like OpenFlow, which is awesome. OpenFlow is a great tool for many purposes. But I could absolutely see being able to use some of the same northbounds and pushing down to something much lower level, potentially, in order to accomplish some ends. And that would just be a different southbound plugin from our point of view. So there's nothing that lashes you to any one particular underlying implementation of those northbounds. And so there's space for what you're describing, whereas in some of the earlier attempts, there was a lot of welding top to bottom that precluded entirely the kinds of innovation that I think you're suggesting you'd like to be able to do.
I would just offer you a pointer also. I mean, there's some recent work, you know, out of academia called P4, and there's related work from
P4 is very exciting.
Huawei on what they call protocol oblivious forward. This is trying to get at your idea, essentially, is to describe the forwarding behavior you want in some sort of HAL and be able to push that down to hardware and have it be implemented there in a custom sort of way, even maybe dynamically in the long term. You may be using FPGA technology to implement that. So there is work on that, but OpenDaylight, to answer your first question, I mean, OpenDaylight itself today, as far as I know, doesn't directly support that because there's no such specification. But I think as those standards emerge, and there's actually, these groups are getting together, and I'll give you a preview that in ONF, I think there will be a new working group defined just to work on this. I mean, they're going to call it maybe OpenFlow 2.0 or something like that, but essentially it's to do exactly what you're describing. So hopefully as those standards come out, we'll start to see support for them in platforms like OpenDaylight.
Yeah, and I think cloud needs to adapt to disaggregated servers eventually, when actually we have something that's a little bit better than what we have right now. But as it gets into more of a bank of resources that you can assemble as VMs or as virtual network elements, that's where we'll see a good paradigm shift.
So I apologize, I'm going to wax geeky because Anees brought up P4, and I think P4 is awesome. For those of you who are not up on P4, P4 basically says, well, we have this OpenFlow thing, and it describes at a very low level flows and flow tables, but you've got to go put a new message in if you want to do something new and interesting, and then you have to go get that implemented everywhere. And that's just a really hard way to allow innovation in networks.
Good morning.
And yeah, and so P4 basically says, what if we had a way of describing the kinds of things that we want to do that we could basically push down? And it's really awesome. But one of the things that would be really neat with something like P4 is, if you had something that spoke P4 as a device, you could come into OpenDaylight and you could do not a plugin that not only does P4, but they can take our existing flow models and send them to a P4 device. And it's actually not that hard. It's a relatively easy thing. It's a model translation problem. And so then if you're the P4 guys pushing for adoption, you can say, listen, we can demonstrably do what's done by OpenFlow, because you can take your applications that you previously had getting service from OpenFlow, and now you can't tell that they're getting service from P4, where you can also do all kinds of other awesome. And I think that's just hugely exciting for forward innovation, because having this abstracted northbound means that if you have an innovative new idea like P4, you don't have to deal with the fact that you're totally blocked out by tons of applications that are welded to some other underlying implementation. So it should radically accelerate the pace of innovation, I think.
Very good. Next question? Yes, sir.
A question regarding security. I know that I didn't go, but a couple weeks ago at DEF CON, one of the presenters showed hacking OpenFlow and OpenDaylight because of some Java vulnerabilities. I guess the question is, what is OpenDaylight team going to do to kind of address just overall security, because that's clearly a critical issue here.
I'll start, and I guess everyone's gonna want to jump on that one. It is a critical issue, and we're already tackling the problem. Of course, I mean, in our deployments, and the deployments I'm working with customers right now, we isolate the whole thing from a physical perspective. We make sure that we do the appliance model or whatever. But the real challenge here is really to come up with the right control structures, the right approaches, even from a container and a software perspective. So with the AAA project, with a couple of other, we started to look at signing our jars. We are trying to put in all the right security flaws, well, addressing some of these security flaws.
So, as a member of the security subcommittee, so we do kind of what's considered to be generally best practice for open source projects like ourselves around this. We have a list, security@list.opendaylight.org. If you know about a security issue, we would ask you to please send it to that list. We also do with every other organization that would really like to fix their problems before they get revealed which is we negotiate with the people who expose it to say, okay, we take you seriously. Can you give us X amount of time to fix it before you go tell the world? This is what absolutely every organization that has security reports does. Now, you can't make them. They're going to do what they're going to do. But if you find people who are finding security issues with OpenDaylight, please encourage them to report them there. We do take it very seriously. That's actually one of the few places that our security list that's actually a closed list, and it is because of this exposure issue. And again, that's also best practice. Every major open source project at our scale does that. So we do have a mechanism in place for those things to be reported. So if you can find those guys and encourage them to come and tell us how they hack things, we would be extremely grateful.
Next question? Yes.
I'm Dawn Bushhouse. I'm with TM Forum, and we're a group of, we're membership driven. We represent a lot of network operators. And so my question is OpenDaylight ever going to address issues of management and orchestration, or is that beyond the scope of what the project would ever do? Our members are really struggling with how to connect their back office systems, their operational support systems, in a software-defined networking environment. So.
Go ahead.
So this gets very fuzzy. So we do have, and I'd have to go look it up again. From our board, we have a defined scope of the area that we work in. From my vague recollection of that scope, I think that elements of anything that allow you to sort of programmatically control your network would be within that scope. So to the degree that what you're describing for orchestration is, I have things I want to programmatically control about my network, that should be in scope at OpenDaylight. And we actually do have a variety of things. We have an SNMP southbound project that's being done out of the University of Taiwan, IPRI. We have support for things like NetConf. We have people who are looking at other kinds of interesting things they want to support, both southbound and in terms of northbound, the kinds of things they expose. So as a personal thing, I tend to look at SDN in the broad, which is SDN is really about being able to programmatically control your network, so you can actually get things done that you need done. And your users have things they need to be able to do programmatically from their network. From my point of view, that falls squarely in scope.
Yeah, I agree with Ed on this one, because I think right now we're a young project. We're starting bottom up, but we are slowly moving up, and we are actually looking at more orchestrated provisioning. For example, in the reservation service, it's really about linking to endpoints across multiple multi-layer technologies and pathfinding and so on. So we are going into the OSS style activities. And so we are looking forward to see how that's going to be addressed for the legacy OSS versus the new one. I'm quite familiar with the TMF and the SID models and all that stuff. So hopefully we'll see how that translates into this paradigm or this view.
And I would just like to add, as someone representing users and operators, welcome. This is great. I mean, getting more input would be fabulous for those types of groups as well. So
Yeah, I think there would be a lot of opportunities for us to work together, because we don't create code, but we do create the collaboration environment for the operators.
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of the times, open source projects like this, the more users and operators we can get in who can feed back, input on what actually people want to use and deploy, it's great. I mean, so I think getting involved is great.
I mean, definitely. And the other thing is, a lot of these things develop in terms of relationships and figuring out how to interact. So for example, and you can sort of express your opinion here, I have a 400-page architecture document I would like to throw at you. Often not very helpful. Too long, didn't read. Hey, I have these specific issues that I need to make sure work for IPv6. Incredibly helpful. Oh my God. So being able to break things into what I refer to often as small actionable steps is profound. And the nice thing is you guys are very good at looking at the world in the broad, of thinking at the level of 400-page requirement documents. And that is awesome. There's a huge need for that. But building those relationships helps you get to a place where you've got people on your end who can come and say, I need X and Y and Z. And we can go, awesome, we'll do that. As opposed to, we can't even wrap our head around the giant thing that you think you want.
Right.
Yes, here in front.
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit and get the panel's opinion on the end user experience as far as it corresponds to technical knowledge, certain skill sets that you need in order to even get involved with using OpenDaylight. For example, if I wanted to create an application that leveraged the northbound APIs, right? It's my own personal struggle has kind of been, as soon as I start asking, well, how do I do this? I quickly fall into all of the developer resources for ODL, right, rather than user resources.
Yeah, I'll take that. So yeah, I've been really trying to address that need within the community, especially starting with the Docs project and trying to create proper documentation guides on how to use it, either from an end user perspective with the graphical tools and CLI and so on, or from a developer perspective. So having a public facing stuff for the API. Initially it was all about the wiki and so on, but we want to make sure that we have something that's out of the project, going to the actual end user and describing exactly what to expect and how to actually work with the environment. Moreover, our work in OpenDaylight has been really to keep things a little more simple. So our company has been focused a lot on simplicity and because of these municipal networks, which are usually not managed by knowledgeable people, we need to make things easier because you don't have good IT departments in these type of environments. So.
If somebody were interested in helping out with that effort, how would they go about that?
Well, actually,
he's the point panel on this. So.
No, but thanks. But yeah, so basically, you can get involved with the community. It's fairly easy to get on board. Ed is a fantastic resource. He's dedicating a lot on board.
I'm also easy to find on IRC. I'm at Warnicke on IRC. Yeah. I don't read email much, but I'm very accessible on IRC.
So, and as well for myself, I can give you my info, and if you have any questions, it would be a pleasure to actually get you on board the project.
The one thing I do want to say from a level set point of view, though, is we have 5 weeks till our release. And so if you get a little bit of a radio silence right now, it's not because we don't love you, it's because we're not sleeping.
I'll second that.
And was your question specifically targeted towards helping out with docs, or was it more broad?
Well, again, I'm thinking about the user experience, right, and getting not just programmatic access to those northbound APIs, but also the GUI is very much just kind of a small sample space of what ODL can actually bring to the table, right?
Yeah.
It's not a full feature set, and I think maybe from somebody who's used to just getting into an application and getting everything that app can do for you, right, right up front, that's not really the case with ODL. Right?
Yeah, I agree with you, and we are actually revisiting the GUI for Helium, so it will be totally different. We've been working very hard on that, so hopefully it will be a better experience for you. Moreover, I think in order to actually get some of that involvement, Linux Foundation has a couple of users forum. I'm planning to host a couple in Canada and from there, I mean, get involved. The more user communities we have, the better. I don't know if Phil wants to add something.
Yeah,
actually. I did actually want to ask you, because you're closer to the Deluxe project than I am, but I do remember a demo going by where you could slide out a little shelf of the UE and see everything you needed to know to make a RESTconf call to do that thing in line in the user interface. Did that make it in?
Yeah, that made it in, but I want to make sure that it has nothing to do with RESTconf. I mean, in some...
We'll see.
It's the advanced version of it, but from an end user perspective, I like pictures, I like switch images, I like...
Oh, no, I agree with you from a user perspective, but I think part of what I was hearing from you as an end user is you want to know how to program the thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, as like an end user who is just wanting to manipulate the GUI, that shouldn't be in your face. Mm-hmm. But if there's a little happy button you push, if you're a guy who programs stuff, like, how do I do this? Mm-hmm. Well, I can do this in the GUI. How would I? Oh, click. That's how I do it.
Yep. This
is exactly what the GUI is doing.
Yes.
In the background.
In Hydrogen, the GUI was part of the controller project, and in Helium, there's a separate project called Deluxe that adds significant features. Similarly, again, with the Helium release that's coming out, again, at the end of next month. I lost my train of thought, sorry. Also with that, again, as Mathieu kind of alluded to, we're taking a significantly bigger emphasis on documentation, bringing out structured documents that are more targeted towards users. Also, as Mathieu mentioned, with the first release, it was very developer focused, and we want to have more users participating, doing their proofs of concepts, giving us feedback, working with each other as far as what they're seeing, ways to work things around, again, collaborating to give the community feedback back. There are a variety of user group type of activities that are starting up, as well as ambassadors. You've got some of the ambassadors actually up here to help really facilitate more use and more and quicker feedback as users. So I would suggest strongly that you engage with those projects, and again, look for better documentation in Helium. With that, we are out of time. Before we close this session, I would like to mention our developer forum is coming up at the end of next month, and if anybody is interested in joining that, it's really going to be looking at what we're going to look at for our next release post-Helium, which will be Lithium, go figure. So if you need information on how to register for that, Katie at the camera at the back of the room will be happy to help you. And with that, give us just a couple of minutes and we'll switch speakers, and Anees, I believe, is up next, talking about life beyond the control panel.